This happened when I was a sophomore in high school, the 2017 to 2018 school year. I'm from Michigan, and our district always started school the Tuesday after Labor Day. This info will be important later. At our high school, the performing arts wing is off to the west, and the auditorium is in between it and the rest of the school, so there's a long hallway around the auditorium. Kids in band and orchestra were tardy all the time, but the directors were understanding of the distance and they didn't mark us late. The rehearsal room has two entry points, a double door that opens in from the main hallway and another that opens out to a parking lot. I had orchestra in the morning when the school's principal went over the intercom. Students and staff, pardon the interruption. School is now officially in lockdown. Everyone looked at each other nervously. It was mid-September, literally the second week of the school year, and we had not any lockdown drills yet. To make matters worse, our orchestra director was not there that day. We had a substitute teacher, a really young one who evidently didn't know the lockdown procedures either. A few students, including me and the sub, took charge. My friend directed the class to the wall that ran parallel to the closed double doors. Then we grabbed spare instrument cases as well as the big timpani drums, and we used them to block the doors from the inside. I went to the other door that opened out to the parking lot, and to my horror, I saw a strange man with a shiny object in his right hand, walking on the path toward the main entrance. I didn't hide my shock very well. I gasped at the sight of this, and I caused a bit of panic in the room. I'd estimated there was about 40 kids in there, and we all realized that this was as real as it gets. He was far enough away and not looking in my direction, so I figured I was safe to keep watching as he approached the main entrance. He got to the front door and he tried the handle, but it was locked. He pulled a few more times, but obviously he had no luck. Then he turned around and walked to another exterior door. This was the one at the end of the language arts hallway, and it was locked too. All of the exterior doors are locked automatically when they close, and they require a staff ID badge to open. I thought we were safe until a friend of mine mentioned that the doors to the gyms do not require that staff ID, and that all the coaches have copies of the physical keys. Then he went on to say that the coaches never locked the doors since they didn't keep the valuable equipment inside the school. Rather in a storage shed under the stadium, which of course they locked every day. We knew it was only a matter of time before this person got in through the gym, and who knows what after. I was of the opinion that we should make a run for it. We were far enough away and had a big enough head start that we could outrun him unless he was some sort of Olympic sprinter. The sub agreed and directed us to the door. We just took off, out of the door through the parking lot, and across the street to a church where we entered in haste and explained everything to the first person we saw. It ended up being the youth pastor, who recognized some of my classmates, and he called the police. Before he even got off the phone, we saw and heard police cars race by and pull into the school's parking lot. We went outside to watch. A few minutes later, an officer walked over and talked to us. They had arrested the man who was indeed carrying a knife on the perimeter. He was a former student who had dropped out many years ago, and I guess he wanted to exact revenge. He wasn't anticipating all the doors being locked, so that certainly saved a few lives on that day. We didn't get in any trouble for leaving the grounds, since we hadn't gone over lockdown procedures yet. I know the coaches and gym teachers got an earful about leaving the doors unlocked, though. Our substitute teacher filled in a few more times after that, and was actually quite good at his job. I hope he is well wherever he ended up. So that's that. No one was hurt, but it was still a terrifying day nonetheless. This is a story that my buddy and I texted each other about the other day, after it randomly crossed my mind again during one of my dreams the previous night. This story is about a scary deep woods experience we had. It takes place during one winter back in the early 2000s. I'm submitting this story in early 2023. It has now been over 2 decades since the events of this story unfolded. At the time of the events, we were in grade 11. As a disclaimer, our names will be slightly altered, and the location in terms of which area we live in exactly will be omitted to help us remain anonymous. We haven't told this story to anyone we know. My buddy and I did nothing morally wrong, as you'll soon see, but we would still like to remain anonymous. We didn't make the best safety-based decisions considering the situation we ultimately ended up in during this story, which is why I said we didn't do anything morally wrong. As you'll soon see, we did do multiple things that were wrong common sense-wise or safety-wise. Anyways, my buddy and I had just finished working out at a local gym. We lived in a fairly small community in Canada, and there weren't many gyms around the area at the time. After finishing up our workout and leaving the gym, my buddy, who we'll call Danny for the sake of this story, suggested that we go out for a trip in his truck on some of the back roads of a nearby mountainous area for fun. On the way to this mountainous or extremely steep-hilled area, which was about a 15-minute drive from the gym, we were having a great time, blasting music and making jokes. The closer we got to our destination, which is this super cool lookout, the thicker the snow started to get, as it was the middle of winter. The further we went down the back roads, more and more trees appeared. This changed eventually, and we reached a clearing in the middle of the back roads. The snow was much more dense than before, and eventually there was too much snow for Danny and I to go any further in his truck. At this point, we weighed out our options, and we decided to just turn around and go home. However, we were in for a surprise. Because no matter how many times we tried, we couldn't turn around because the snow had gotten so deep that we couldn't go through it to back up his truck. The only reason we were able to make it to where we were was because of the speed that his truck was going, and since we suddenly stopped the truck to weigh our options, we couldn't get up enough speed to back up and peel out of there. My buddy and I took the time to check his truck to see if there was anything we could do to dig out the part of the snow to help make an easier exit for us. But unfortunately, we forgot to put a shovel in the back of his truck on this day. I offered to run to a nearby town to get help, but after running for a few minutes, I stopped running. I thought that what I was doing could potentially be a bad idea because the snow was extremely deep on the section of the back roads where we were stuck. For some context, I'm about 178 centimeters tall, or 5 foot 10 inches. The snow was almost past my knees when I started moving down the back road to get help. The back roads were also super icy and slippery further down the mountainous area we had to drive through to get to where we were stuck. In addition to all of this, we were in a super remote area, meaning if anything happened to me, like if I eventually slipped on an icy section of the back road or tripped over a rock, it would be extremely unlikely that anyone would find me. So nobody would be there to help. So ultimately, I decided to carefully walk back to the truck. Basically, I didn't run super far to get help because I realized that it would most likely be safer for my buddy and I to stick together, just in case somebody were to eventually show up to our truck to help us. We panicked for a bit because nobody really knew where we were. However, we eventually came to terms with the idea that we might have to spend the night out there in the wilderness, as it was getting late and the sun was probably going to go down within the next hour or two. It was winter in Canada, so the weather was a bit colder. Unfortunately, we didn't come too prepared for the situation we ended up in at this point, clothing-wise, because we were just working out at the gym and we were still wearing shorts and t-shirts. So we were slightly worried about the condition we'd be in by the next morning if we stayed out there all night in Danny's truck. Eventually, the sun began to set and a thick fog sunk over the clearing we were in, making the lack of visibility another stressful element of this experience. After what was probably about 20 minutes of darkness and fog, headlights came into view in the fog ahead of us. A man stepped out of his truck that came through the fog and he walked over to our truck. The man lightly tapped his finger against Danny's window, signaling for him to lower the window. Danny lowered the window slightly. The man then spoke. He asked us if we were having trouble and needed assistance. We explained our situation to him and he agreed to help us. We also told him that his truck was the only one we had seen since we started driving on this back road. The man explained that he lived in a small house just up the road and he wanted to go out and drive around in his truck on this particular night. The man then turned around and walked back to his truck. He reached into his truck and he appeared to be grabbing something from the inside. After a couple of seconds of watching him do this, we saw that he pulled out a chainsaw. The man then proceeded to walk back towards our truck. Just before reaching where our truck was, he departed from the clearing and walked over to a nearby tree in the wooded area of the side of the back road. He then started to cut a few skinny branches off of the tree with the chainsaw. I got out of the truck and I walked over to him, dragging myself through the deep snow. While he was cutting the branches, I asked him what he was doing in a loud but also polite and curious tone. I introduced myself formally as Jesse, Again, not my real name, but for the sake of remaining anonymous and telling this story. I introduced myself using my real name when I actually spoke to him. He introduced himself to me too and explained that he could use the small branches to help prop our truck tires up on top of the snow. And then we'd have to rev the engine a bit and reverse the truck to get it unstuck from the deep snow. After our truck was propped up, my buddy and I eventually managed to get the truck onto a part of the road with a lighter snow covering. We then hopped out of our truck to thank the man for helping us. The man told us it was not a problem, and then he got back into his truck, which had bigger tires than ours, meaning it was better equipped than our truck for moving through heavy snow. The man turned his truck around and disappeared back into the nighttime winter fog just as quickly as he appeared. After he left, we agreed and eventually became 100% convinced that we had just met our guardian angel in human form. As a final note, I'd just like to say that both my buddy and I have always been, and always will be, extremely grateful for the help we received on that winter night. This story takes place in 2019, and it's 2023 as I'm typing this. When I lived in my old neighborhood, we always had this weird neighbor. I don't know much about him, but all I knew was that he did not like kids. The thing that happened on a weekly basis is that he would threaten my older brother for no reason. Whether that be he was outside doing yard work or playing basketball, he always seemed to come out whenever my brother went outside, like he was watching him. Now here's where more threatening comes into play and everything gets a little bit more serious. My dad was outside mowing the lawn, and from what I know, the man came up to him and gave him a smack on the shoulder, and he told my dad if I were to ever step foot on his lawn, that he would hurt me badly. Side note, the time that this incident happened, my older brother was in college, so the only other son he could have been talking about was me, even though I've never been on his lawn or even talked with him in general. Now the next encounter came a few months later. Me and my cousin, who I'll call Jake for privacy reasons, were outside playing basketball, and out of nowhere, he started yelling at us, and he said that he would, and I quote, beat our ass. Me and Jake were confused at the time because we had no idea why he was yelling at us. So we decided to go inside and tell my parents. They said that if he ever talked to us like that again, they would call the cops. And for the next few weeks, we had no encounters with him. A few months later, Jake came over again, and we were staying up watching movies and eating snacks. Once we were done with the movie, we really wanted to play video games, so we went downstairs to my room. If I were to estimate, we were in my room for about a half an hour before we heard the doorbell ring. It was like 2 o'clock at night, so there's no way in hell we were going to open it. And we started hearing knocking, which then turned to banging. This lasted for about a minute, but then fortunately it stopped. We were scared out of our minds and we had no idea what to do. About 5 minutes later, we heard the sound of the basement door opening and closing. Now we were pretty sure that whoever was at the door somehow got in and probably lockpicked our door. We stood in silence for what felt like hours, and suddenly my flight mode started to take over, and I went over to my baseball bag and I grabbed my bat. I had an extra one, so I gave it to Jake. With us both being armed with bats, I slowly started opening my bedroom door. The hallway was empty, so we started walking around the basement checking everywhere, but there was nothing. Then, in the back of the room, we see that our back door leading to the backyard was open, so we slowly started moving towards it. Once we got close enough, I peered outside. We noticed that our gate was open, so that's probably how they escaped. The next morning, we tell my parents everything, and at first they didn't believe us until my grandma who lived with us told them that she heard the doorbell, the knocking, and the basement door closing twice. She said she didn't think much of it and that it was just us. Good thing at the time of this story, we were about to move, and coincidentally, one of my friend's family members bought the house. I'd say probably about a month after moving, I asked my friend how the house was going. He said it was going good, but he told me that the same neighbor had been watching him and his younger siblings when they go outside, just like he did with me. They haven't had any problems for a while though. Jump forward to 2023, I still wonder if it was him who got into my house, and what would have happened to me and my cousin that night if we would have ran into him.